Okay, hi, and welcome to this video about some of the language used in science. But first I want to tell you that I was reading a book about helium recently, and I couldn't put it down. You're welcome. All right, so we've already talked a bit about language and authority and how we use language to reflect the way science is actually done. Now we're going to talk specifically about some of the terms in science, many of which you may have already heard. So what's the point of this lesson? It's to describe the difference between a theory and a hypothesis, to identify independent, dependent, and controlled variables in a simple experiment, and a few more other things along the way. First up, let me try to distinguish for you the difference between textbook science and actual science, if you will. So the reason I'm doing this is because I'm trying to impress upon you that you guys learn science as background, and you learn ways to kind of confirm things that we already know about science, and that's really important. But we also want to see what scientists are actually doing and why they are talking and doing things the way they do it. So textbook science, in other words, what you usually get in your science classes, including what you will get at various points, is so textbook science investigations designed for students to gather data and draw conclusions that support well-established theories and laws. So here's an example from a physical science investigations book. What is the relationship between force and motion, right? That relationship has been known and described mathematically for hundreds of years. And you are simply gathering data to do that, which really helps you understand what it's like to be science, and it gives you a hands-on experience with this important concept. But it's not like what actual science is doing right now, which is investigations designed to go beyond current understanding and come up with new explanations, right? So actual scientists are trying to go beyond our current understanding. And an example is this crazy image here of an experiment done at the Large Hadron Collider, which you may or may not have heard about. It was first started up in 2012, and it's this massive ring under the ground in France that slams particles together at such incredibly high speeds and temperatures that they shatter and give us a picture of what things might have been like at the moment of the Big Bang. And that's the image of the results of one of their experiments. Okay, so with that, let's look at what in these new investigations that real scientists are doing, what are they trying to get at? And so notice my little take notes fellow up here. Take notes. Okay. So scientists are kind of interested in doing two things at the same time. One is broad investigations. Those are big questions that may take decades and involve tens or hundreds of studies at a minimum to try to answer. So something like, how do new species form? It's a huge question, right? How are traits passed down from one generation to the next? That's been going on for about 200 years now. And so those are huge, big, broad questions that are often over a lot of the things that scientists are thinking about. And then specific studies, that's what most scientists spend most of their actual time doing, and those are very focused single investigations. So really constrained questions that ask something that we can really sink our teeth into. And then a single study designed to gather evidence to see what we can find out that's related to that question. So example of some of these would be a broad investigation of how did the universe form, right? Which is probably the biggest question you could possibly have. We know now, or I should say, we know now that the universe formed in something that we call the Big Bang. We still don't really have any idea what happened at the moment of the Big Bang, before the Big Bang, or why any of that happened. So these are really broad questions still out there. And then specific studies like the one that I just showed you would ask a question like, what happens when we take some lead ions and smash them together at temperatures of over 10 trillion degrees? And we'll find out later in this class what a lead ion is. But just for now, think of that as a specific study done that is answering this specific question. That's all part of this broad investigation about how the universe formed. Okay, and now for some important terms, right? You've probably heard these before, but we want to be really specific about what they are. So what is a theory? A theory is a powerful explanation that scientists agree on. Right, so this is and I'll explain this more in a moment, but scientists agree. there isn't anybody in the scientific community standing around saying, the theory of evolution isn't a thing, or the theory of plate tectonics isn't a thing, right? It has so much evidence behind it, and it's so good at explaining what's going on that it's considered a theory. A hypothesis, meanwhile, is a proposed explanation for something really specific phenomenon. And that's when you ask a question, a really specific question, and say, well, based on what I already know, this is what I think might be going on, right? It's not a guess. It's what I think is going on based on what I already know. And hypotheses and theories are not really directly related. Let me give you an example of two hypothesis and a theory that come from the same field, but aren't necessarily growing from one to another. And so the one really big example of a theory is the theory of evolution by natural selection, which has been accepted over, now that it's been about 160 years since it was published. It's been accepted as the best explanation for why life looks the way it does now. But then there are specific hypotheses that fall under that umbrella, if you will. And one of the most famous ones was when Darwin went to the Galapagos Islands, and he looked at all of these different finches, right? So these are all just different birds, finches, that eat different kinds of seeds different ways. And he was looking at the difference in their beaks, and he hypothesized that the difference in the beaks was an adaptation to the different kinds of food available there. Let's talk about theories again for a moment. So we often run into this challenge where people say something like, I don't believe in the theory of evolution or some other scientific theory. It's just a theory, right? The reason that that's not really an accurate way to describe it is because theory means something different in the world of science than it does in the everyday world. And let's take a look at some dictionary definitions. The scientific use of the word is that a theory is a coherent group of tested propositions, big words, but it's an idea, a coherent idea commonly regarded as correct, right? In the scientific sense, this is correct, right? We're not doubting that. But the everyday use of the word could mean a proposed explanation whose status is still conjectural. Conjectural saying, this is my hunch, right? And those are two fairly different ideas about how certain people are. The scientific idea is very certain that this is the explanation that makes the most sense. The non-scientific or everyday use is you're just kind of coming up with thoughts, and we still have a long way to go to be sure. So scientists do not doubt whether major theories are correct because they're based on so many different lines of evidence that have repeatedly supported an idea. So it's been hundreds of years. There's a massive amount of research that's going on that all points in the direction of this same idea. These examples include evolution by natural selection, general relativity, which is Einstein's theory that explains how gravity works, atomic theory, the idea that everything with matter is made up of tiny invisible atoms, germ theory, right, the idea that we get sick because of specific microscopic things that we call germs, is a theory, right? There's nobody out there who's going to doubt that what's making you sick if you get COVID is that the specific virus particles, but it's called a theory because that's the explanation for how we pass diseases on. And cell theory is the other big one in biology, which says all living things are made up of cells. So now when it comes to research questions, and I'm telling you this so that you can kind of start to pick apart some bits of what we read about when we read about specific research examples. Scientists are usually interested in what we call broad research areas. So they'll pick topics like, dinosaurs. Probably be a little more specific than dinosaurs, but something like dinosaurs, or how grasslands work, how forests work, something like that. But what they then do is within those areas they conduct specific investigations. So they start to get specific investigations aimed at answering research questions, right? So research question is something that you come up with to be able to ask something that you can then try to answer with evidence. So an example could be, why are aspen trees dying out in large numbers? And this is something that happened over the last 20 years or so. It's called sudden aspen death syndrome. And researchers and others started saying, man, there's a lot of aspen trees dying in areas like Colorado. Why is that happening? And so that you try to answer a specific research question with a hypothesis, which is a possible explanation. And just like the research question, it's based on existing understanding, right? Based on what I already know about this topic, this is what I think is the answer to the research question. And as we already know, scientists are actually sort of more excited to find out that their hypothesis is wrong because it allows them to develop new understanding. One of the things I really want to emphasize is hypotheses do not become theories. They're two different things. So if you've had that impression in the past, throw it away. Hypotheses are possible answers to specific research questions. Theories are something that when people look over a really long period of time at lots and lots of evidence of lots of things, they then come up with an explanation. A theory is just a totally different scope than a hypothesis. So here's bringing our example a little farther forward. If our research question is why are the aspen trees dying out, our hypothesis could be warming temperatures are stressing aspen trees at lower elevations. And actually, as it turns out, the data that's been gathered since then seems to support this hypothesis. So there are other hypotheses that were possibly offered, like maybe it's some kind of insect situation, but this is the one that was supported by the evidence. And so what do scientists do after research questions and hypotheses? They have a wide variety of tools at their disposal. You've heard that there isn't a scientific method, and that the scientific method really just kind of describes this first method that I've listed here, which is conducting lab experiments, and it actually only refers to really specific, simple lab experiments. The reality is there's lots of ways, and sometimes scientists make up their ways. They just want to collect observable, independently verifiable data. And they might do an experiment in a lab. They might collect data in the field, which is going out and making observations and measurements. They might create a physical model of something, right? Something that you can touch or push or move around in a lab, or they might make a model on a computer, or they might do many of these things, right? All of these are aimed at the same thing, which is gathering evidence that can be made to use to make a claim.